엘프 지났고 이번에는 리틀 더클링 들어볼까요?
Recording by Phil Chenevert. Six Little Ducklings by Catherine Pye. Chapter 1. Old Mother Duck and her 6 little ducklings lived in a hollow tree down by the river, and here they were all as happy as the day was long. The whole of the broad, bright river to swim about on, and there was no one to bother them or drive them about. Mother Duck had not always lived in the hollow tree. Once she had lived in a farmyard back in the country and away from the river, but she had not been very happy there. For one thing, there was a very cross old watchdog in the farmyard. He was kept chained to his doghouse through the day and never set loose until the other animals had gone to bed. But he used to snap at the ducks and chickens whenever they came near his doghouse, and that frightened them. Then there was no place to swim but in a muddy little duck pond that almost dried up in the heat of summer. But the worst thing of all at the farmhouse was the way the farmer's wife used to steal the ducks' eggs.
Oh no.
No matter how carefully Mrs. Duck hid her eggs, Mrs. Farmer always found them and took them away.
Oh no.
Once she put a number of them in a hen's nest and allowed a hen to set on them. After a while, the hen hatched out 11 of the cunningest, fuzziest, yellowest ducklings that ever were seen.
Oh.
The hen was just as pleased and proud as though she had laid the eggs herself. But she didn't in the least know how to bring up a brood of ducklings. Mrs. Duck could see that very plainly. She didn't even want them to get their feet wet, and she almost had a fit when they went into the water one day. After that, Mrs. Duck made up her mind she would not stay at the farm any longer. She started off into the wide world early one morning without saying anything to anyone, and waddled on and on and on until after a while she came to the hollow tree beside the river. Here she made a nest and hatched out a little brood for herself and brought them up the way young ducklings should be brought up, and was very happy. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of 6 Little Ducklings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christina Webb of Christiansburg, Virginia. 6 Little Ducklings by Catherine Pye. Chapter 2. There were 6 of the little ducklings, and their names beginning with the eldest were Squdge and Queek, Buff, Pintoes, and Fluffy. And the littlest and cunningest one of all was named Curlytail. Buff and Fluffy and Curlytail were girls, and the other 3 were boys. One fine day when the wind was blowing, and the leaves were rustling, and the little wood rabbits jumping high and kicking their heels for joy, Mother Duck told the little ducklings she was going to take them for a picnic.
Picnic?
Oh, goody, goody, they cried, and clapped their wings for joy. Mother Duck got out a little basket of meadowgrass that an old muskrat had made for her, and she and the children packed it full of luncheon. There were crisp watercress and wild celery and little snails and all sorts of good things, such as little ducklings like to eat. As soon as the basket was packed, they started off. The ducklings thought they would probably go down to the river, but instead of that, Mother Duck, "Here's where we'll have our picnic," said Mother Duck.
Oh.
She put down the basket and unpacked the food, and then she and the ducklings sat down around it and ate and ate. And how how good it all tasted.
Oh,
Just
no.
as food
Oh,
always
yes.
does on picnics. After they had finished and could eat no more, Mother Duck said, "Come now, let us climb up to the top of the rocks and see what we can see." That was fun too, clambering up over the rocks. The ducklings scrambled and slipped and squeaked, and their mother helped them. So after a while, they found themselves on the very tip-top of the highest rock of all.
Wow.
Oh, how the wind did blow up there.
Whoa.
"Now look," said Mother Duck. "Do you see over there?" And she pointed with her wing to a farmyard in the distance. "That is where I used to live." "Why, Mother," cried the ducklings, "we thought you'd always lived down by the river in our tree." "No, indeed, I lived right there in that barnyard," answered their mother, and then she began to tell them about it, and of her life there, and of how, if she had stayed there, they might have had a hen for their mother instead of her. That seemed a horrible thing to the little ducklings.
Oh, no.
That they might have had some other mother instead of their own. They wanted to know what a hen was, because of course they had never seen one, living where they did. Their mother tried to tell them, but they could not understand very well. "I wouldn't like a hen for a mother," cried Squudge. "But I would like to see a farmyard and to hear a dog bark and a cow hoot. Do they make as big a noise as thunder? Will you take me there sometime, Mother?" But Mother Duck told him, no, indeed. It would be very dangerous to go back to the farmyard.
Oh,
If the
no.
farmer and his wife saw the ducklings, they might catch them and shut them up in a coop
Oh,
and never
no.
let them get away again. The thought of that frightened the other ducklings.
Cool.
Only Squudge said to himself, "She
Kubi.
couldn't catch me. I can peck too hard and run too fast.
어? 왜
I
이래?
wish
굽이 뭔데요?
쿱은 이렇게 오리하고 새들을 키우는 닭장이에요, 닭장. 닭장.
take me there sometime, Mother, just to see it all." And rather tired, Verbox got a plaything that she could. Farmer and his no indeed.
잠깐만.
6 little ducklings by Catherine Tillett, Wolf and Blue.
And, he was often disobedient to his dear
Won't you? The other 4 little ducklings wanted to hear it too, so Mother Duck told Curly Tail if she didn't want to listen, she could run over in the corner and play by herself for a while. And when the story was finished, she could come back and choose another one, any one that she liked, and her mother would tell it next. So Curly Tail, who was always sweet and obedient, went over in the corner and got out her doll and began to play, while Mother Duck told the others the story. And this is the sad tale of Wiggle Waggle Whisk Tail. End of chapter 3.
chapter 3가 벌써 끝나네. 잘못 들었네.
Well, that is now me. But I would like to see a farmyard and to hear how the and to tell them about it, and of her life there, and of how, if she had stayed there, they might have had a hen for their mother instead of her. That seemed a horrible thing to the little ducklings, that they might have had some other mother instead of their own.
Oh, no.
They wanted to know what a hen was, because of course they had never seen one, living where they did. Their mother tried to tell them, but they could not understand very well. "I wouldn't like a hen for a mother," cried Squudge. "But I would like to see a farmyard and to hear a dog bark and a cow hoot. Do they make as big a noise as thunder? Will you take me there sometime, Mother?" But Mother Duck told him, no, indeed. It would be very dangerous to go back to the farmyard. If the farmer and his wife saw the ducklings, they might catch them and shut them up in a coop and never let them get away again. The thought of that frightened the other
일단 들어봐.
ducklings. Only Squdge said stoutly, "She couldn't catch me. I can peck too hard and run too fast. And I wish you would take me there sometime, Mother, just to see it all." Mother Duck made no answer, for looking up she saw that rain clouds were gathering overhead. "Hurry, children, hurry," she cried. "There's going to be a storm, and we must get home before it begins." Down they scrambled in a great hurry and started off through the woods as fast as they could. And they made such good time that they reached the hollow tree just as the first great drops began to fall. They were all out of breath and rather tired, especially Curly Tail. But as their mother said, that did not really matter as long as they had escaped a wetting. End of Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of 6 Little Ducklings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christina Webb of Virginia. 6 Little Ducklings by Catherine Pyle. Chapter 3. How cozy it was there in the dry hollow of the tree, with the rain beating harder and harder outside and streaming down the tree trunks. After a while, the ducklings got out their playthings and began to play with them, but soon they tired of this, and nestling down about their mother, they begged her to tell them a story. "A story?" said Mother Duck. "Very well. What shall it be about?" "Tell about Wiggle Waggle Whisktail," cried Squdge and Queek.
Wiggle Waggle Whisktail?
No, don't tell about that," begged Curly Tail, almost in tears. "That's too sad a story, Mother.
Oh,
it
no.
always makes me cry."
Oh no.
"Pshaw, I wouldn't be such a baby as to cry over a story," cried Squdge. "Go ahead, Mother, tell it, won't you?" The other 4 little ducklings wanted to hear it too, so Mother Duck told Curly Tail if she didn't want to listen,
잠깐만, 아빠 운전 중이라서 안 들리는 거야. 기다려. 됐어.
over in the corner and play by herself for a while. And when the story was finished, she could come back and choose another one, any one that she liked, and her mother would tell it next. So Curly Tail, who was always sweet and obedient, went over in the corner and got out her doll and began to play, while Mother Duck told the others the story.
What's the
And
story?
this is the sad tale of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail.
Wiggle Waggle Whisktail.
End of Chapter 3.
Chapter 4. 기다려.
Chapter 4, Part 1 of 6 Little Ducklings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Xena Blue. 6 Little Ducklings by Catherine Pyle. Wiggle Waggle Whisktail was a very naughty little duckling. He quarreled with his brothers and sisters, and he always wanted the best of
차
everything for
지나가는 거.
himself.
차 돌아가는
And,
거.
worst of all, he was often disobedient to his dear good mother.
Oh no.
Sometimes his mother hardly knew what to do.
What
It
did you?
worried her so to have him so naughty. Over and over again, Wiggle Waggle's mother had told him that he must never go out of doors when it was raining.
That's right.
You know, I have often told you that myself, my dears, said Mother Duck.
That's right.
It is very, very bad for little ducks to go out in the rain. Flat water, like ponds and puddles and rivers, is good for them. But when water comes down from overhead like rain or waterfalls, it is very bad for them.
Very
Sometimes
bad.
they get drowned in it.
Drowned in it.
It began to rain and rain and rain around Wiggle Waggle Whisktail's house. His mother was very busy that day. She did not have...
drown은 물에 빠져서 이렇게 익사하는 걸 drown이라고 그러지. 물에 빠져서 죽는 거예요. 큰일 나요. drown이 그 말이야.
time to watch over the children, but she never thought any of them would be foolish enough to go out in the rain. She had told them too often about the danger of it. But Wiggle Waggle Whisktail would not believe anything that anyone told him. He waited until his brothers and sisters were busy over that day, and then he
비로
slipped
갈까요?
away
그래. 비로 가고 있어. 또 들어봐.
very quietly and out into the rain. Oh, how good it felt! He raised his bill and caught greedily at the drops as they fell. It's wet, said Wiggle Waggle Whisktail to himself, but it isn't wet enough. Just around the corner, a rain pipe came down from the roof of the farmhouse. The rain roared down it and splattered out like a waterfall. Whew! This is the wettest thing I ever saw, cried Wiggle Waggle. I guess this is the place for me.
That's
So he got right under the drain pipe where the water spouted hardest. It felt good on his back, and he held up his head and opened his beak and swallowed the water as fast as he could. Then he was wet inside as well as out. Wet enough at last. If only Mother could see me now, he giggled to himself. So he swallowed and swallowed and swallowed
Oh no.
until after a while he was so full of water that he burst, just like a balloon that has been blown too full of air. And that was the end of him. Not till the rain was over did his mother find he was not at home. Then she came out to look for him, but she could not find him. She called and called him, but he did not answer, and he did not come. He never came home.
Oh no.
Then his mother wept for him, and his brothers and sisters wept for him, but they never saw Wiggle Waggle Whisktail again,
Oh no.
because he was laying under the rain pipe, all burst. That was the sad story of Wiggle Waggle Whisktail,
Oh no.
and always made Curlytail cry. Not until it was ended would she come out of the corner. But when she did come, and it was her turn to choose a story, she chose a very different sort of one for her mother to tell. For she chose a funny story that made all the little ducklings laugh and laugh.
이게 씨야.
But the mother liked to tell them about Wiggle Waggle Whisktail every now and then. She thought the story was a good lesson for them.
Good lesson for them.
Chapter 4, Part 2 of Six Little Ducklings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Zena Blue. Six Little Ducklings by Catherine Pye. The rain rained itself out in the night, and the next morning, when the little ducklings awoke, they found, to their glee, that the sun was shining bright and clear. That meant they could go down to the river for a swim, as she always liked to be close to Mother. Don't go in the water until I get there, children, Mother Duck called after the others as they ran ahead.
뒤에 지나왔어.
No, Mother, we won't, answered the ducklings. Squdge was a large, stout, active duckling. He could run faster than any of the others, and so he was the first to reach the riverbank. There he began looking about for any tidbits he could find in the way of a fat beetle, a grasshopper, or a tadpole. He was a very greedy duckling. Often and often his mother was obliged to tell him not to be so greedy, but to share things with his little brothers and sisters. But he was not always willing to do this. Now, as he peered about with his bright black eyes, he suddenly espied near the mud bank a little round hole, and just showing over the edge of the hole was what looked like the tail of a particularly fine, fat worm. "Oh ho," thought Squdge to himself. "Here's a fine fat morsel. I'll just pull it out and eat it before any of the others come to share it with me." With his broad little beak, he made a dive at the tail, and pinching it tight, he began to pull. Now the tail did not belong to a worm at all, but to a little brown snake that had been lying there in the hole, which was its home, fast asleep. When it felt some unseen thing nipping its tail and holding it, it was terribly frightened. It began to pull and struggle, trying to get loose, and Squdge kept pulling and trying to get it out. It must be a wonderfully fine fat worm to pull so hard, he thought, and the more it pulled, the more determined he was to have it. Before he could get it out, however, Queek and the others saw him, and up they ran, eager for a share of anything he might have caught. They too seized a hold of the tail and began to pull. All of them together were too strong for the snake. It had to come. Out they dragged it, out and out, longer and longer. Last of all, its head slipped out from the hole. Then it twisted around, hissing with fright. When the ducklings saw what they had caught, that it was not a worm but a snake, they were so terrified that they fell over backward on the ground and lay there, afraid to move. They dared not even look to see whether the snake had gone or was making ready to swallow them. If they had only known it, it had been just as much frightened as they, and as soon as it was free, it had slipped away into the water to nurse its pinched tail and quiet. They were still laying there when their mother and Curly Tail reached the place. At first, Mother Duck did not know what
왜 라이라? 다 왔잖아, 라이라.
She was afraid they were hurt or sick. But when she helped them to their feet and found they were only frightened and not hurt at all, she began to laugh at them. "But now you see, children," she said more seriously, "what comes of being greedy. If you hadn't been in such a hurry to catch the worm and gobble it down, you would have waited till I came, and I could have soon told you it was not a worm you had found, but a snake." The little ducks felt quite ashamed of themselves. They felt they had acted in a very silly and greedy manner. Moreover, they felt quite sad, for their mother said they were so hot and frightened she could not allow them to go into the water just yet. They would have to sit on the bank for a while and cool off. Then she took Curly Tail down to a shallow place in the river and caught a nice little tadpole for her, while her brothers and sisters had to sit in a row along the bank and look on. It was not very long, however, before their mother called to them and they could come. And the little ducklings ran joyously down the slope and slipped off into the water. There they paddled up and down and stood on their heads and ran water races with each other as merrily as ever. Their adventure with the snake quite forgotten. End of chapter 4.
Just
Chapter
five,
5 of Six Little Ducklings. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit
와, 입구에
LibriVox.org.
찬스네.
Recording by Xena Blue. Six Little Ducklings by Catherine Pine. Chapter 5.
Chapter 5.
When the ducklings stayed at home instead of going to the river, that was when it was too cold and stormy for them to swim. They had a number of toys to play with. Squdge and Keith had a little cart, and they had a tame beetle that they had trained to pull it. Sometimes they gave the dolls a ride in the cart. There were 2 dolls. One belonged to Fluffy, and one belonged to Curly Tail. Mrs. Muskrat had made the dolls for them. The same old muskrat who had made the picnic basket for their mother. The dolls were made of 2 old gnarled pieces of wood that
내려볼까요?
Mrs. Muskrat had gnawed and shaped with her sharp teeth.
네, 나오.